Married the wrong man, a mistake that cost me everything, my happiness, my status, even my life. Now I've been given a chance to rewrite my tragically flawed love story. Now I'm back on the day my family forced me to choose a husband, a choice that sealed my doom. But this time, I know the players, I know the game, and I know the deadly consequences. The only question is, can I change the ending, or am I destined to repeat the same tragic mistakes? This time, I play my own game. Life as a noblewoman in the Eridorian Empire was, to put it bluntly, a gilded cage. Your value was determined by your birth, your beauty, and, most importantly, your marriage. And I, Olivia Chaplin, was playing the game at a distinct disadvantage. My sister Christine was the family jewel. Golden-haired, sapphire-eyed, and with a smile that could launch 1,000 ships, or at least secure a lucrative alliance, she was everything I wasn't. I was serviceable. Pleasant enough with a decent dowry and a respectable lineage, but lacking Christine's dazzling charisma and breathtaking beauty. I was the moon to her sun, forever orbiting her brilliance, forever in her shadow. The day our fates were sealed arrived with the subtlety of a charging warhorse. Father, Baron Chaplin, a man who viewed his daughters as bargaining chips in his endless game of social climbing, summoned us to his study. "My dear daughters," he began, his voice booming with self-importance, "the time has come to secure your futures. I have arranged a unique opportunity, a chance for you to choose your own husbands." Choose, as if we had any real say in the matter. He presented us with our options, the Lloyd brothers. Matthew Lloyd, the elder, was the legitimate heir to the Marquisate of Northwood, a renowned general, a war hero, a man of impeccable reputation and considerable wealth. He was, in short, the grand prize. The catch? He was known for his cold demeanor, his battle-hardened spirit, and his disinterest in marriage. Madison Lloyd, the younger, was the illegitimate son of a concubine. Charming, Sudarshan, and supposedly a scholar of some repute, he was considered the lesser prize, the consolation gift for the daughter who didn't snag the golden goose. Christine, predictably, didn't hesitate. "Father," she declared, her voice ringing with a carefully cultivated sweetness, "I choose Matthew Lloyd. I believe he is the man who will bring the most honor and prestige to our family." She batted her eyelashes, flashed her dazzling smile, and generally acted like she'd just won the lottery. Which, in her mind, she probably had. My father beamed, his chest puffing up with pride. He'd secured the alliance he craved, the connection to one of the most powerful families in the realm, and I was left with Madison. "Olivia," my father prompted, his smile fading slightly, his eyes narrowing with a hint of disappointment. I forced a smile, masking the bitter resentment that churned in my gut. I choose Madison, father," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I believe he is a kind and virtuous man." It was a lie, of course. I barely knew Madison. But what else could I say? Defy my father? Challenge Christine? In this world, a woman's only power lay in her choice of husband. And my choice had been made for me. My marriage to Madison Lloyd was a slow, agonizing descent into misery. He was everything Christine had pretended he wasn't. He was neglectful, unfaithful, and utterly devoid of any redeeming qualities. He treated me with a thinly veiled contempt, constantly reminding me of his sacrifice in marrying me, the less desirable Chaplain sister. "You should be grateful, Olivia," he'd sneer, after returning from one of his many late-night study sessions, which, I suspected, involved more than just books. "I could have had anyone, but I chose you, out of the kindness of my heart." The kindness of his heart, I soon discovered, was a bottomless pit of self-serving ambition. He was a plagiarist, a fraud, a man who built his reputation on stolen ideas and fabricated achievements. He used my family's connections, my dwindling dowry, to further his own career, while simultaneously treating me like a piece of furniture, a decorative but ultimately useless addition to his household. Meanwhile, Christine was living the fairy tale. Or, so it seemed, her engagement to Matthew Lloyd was the talk of the realm. They were the golden couple, the epitome of power and beauty. Every social event, every ball, every gathering was a showcase of their impending union, a constant reminder of my own miserable fate. Isn't Matthew just divine, Olivia? Christine would gush, her eyes sparkling with malicious glee. So strong, so handsome, so powerful. Yes, Christine, I'd reply, my voice flat. He's wonderful. The only solace I found was in my secret passion, Velvet Haven. It was a small, unassuming shop in the capital city, a place where I could indulge my love for art, for beauty, for creating things. I'd started it with a small inheritance from my grandmother, pouring my heart and soul into it, transforming it into a haven of creativity and commerce. It was mine, the one thing in my life that Madison couldn't touch, couldn't control, couldn't taint. And then the news arrived, shattering Christine's perfect world and plunging her into a very different kind of reality. Matthew Lloyd was dead. The details were murky. Some said he'd been killed in battle, a victim of a treacherous ambush. Others whispered of poison, of conspiracies, of foul play. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Christine, the almost Marchioness, was now just a widow. A young, beautiful widow, yes, but a widow nonetheless. And in the patriarchal society of the Eridorian Empire, a widow without powerful connections was vulnerable. She came to me, of course. She wept, she wailed, she bemoaned her tragic fate. She expected sympathy, support, a shoulder to cry on. And I, despite everything, gave it to her. I'm so sorry, Christine, I said, holding her trembling body, stroking her hair, offering words of comfort I didn't truly feel. I know how much you cared for him. It was a lie, of course. She'd cared for his title, his wealth, his power, but I played my part, the dutiful sister, the supportive friend. Because that's what women did in this world. We supported each other, even when we secretly despised each other. We played the game, we followed the rules, we survived. But my own survival, I knew, was precarious. Madison's cruelty escalated, his contempt for me growing with each passing day. He saw me as a burden, a constant reminder of his own failures, of his inferiority. And I, trapped in a loveless marriage, stripped of my dignity, my hope, my future, was slowly withering away. A wilted flower, crushed beneath the weight of a world that had no place for me. Or so I thought. Until the day I died and, impossibly, woke up again. Ready to play a very different game. Madison, free from the shadow of his brother, became a caricature of everything I'd initially feared. He wasn't just neglectful, he was actively cruel. He saw me not as a wife, but as a resource, a tool to be exploited. My family connections, once a source of pride, became a weapon in his hands. He used my name, my reputation, to secure loans, to open doors, to further his own pathetic ambitions. Olivia, darling, he'd say, his voice dripping with false affection. I need you to speak to your uncle about that investment opportunity. He trusts you. He'll listen to you. And I, trapped by societal expectations, by the fear of scandal, by my own dwindling resources, would obey. I'd smile, I'd flatter, I'd beg for a man who despised me. The debts piled up. Madison's investments were always disastrous, his business ventures always doomed to fail. He blamed me, of course, my extravagance, my lack of support, my very existence. You're a burden, Olivia, he'd sneer, his eyes cold and filled with contempt. A useless, expensive burden. I should have married Christine. At least she had ambition. He isolated me from my friends, from my family, from anyone who might offer me support or escape. He controlled my finances, my movements, my very life. There were threats, too. Subtle at first, then increasingly blatant. You wouldn't want anything to happen to your family, would you, Olivia? He'd say, his voice a low, menacing whisper. They've been so generous to us. It would be a shame if something unfortunate were to occur. I lived in a constant state of fear, of anxiety, of despair. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, a trapped bird in a gilded cage. And then the end. It's a blur, even now. A haze of pain, of fear, of regret. There was a struggle, a heated argument, a shove. I remember falling, hitting my head, the world spinning. I remember Madison's face looming above me, his eyes filled with a chilling mixture of rage and satisfaction. "You were always a disappointment, Olivia," he'd whispered. Those were his very last words spoken to me. And then nothing. Darkness, silence, oblivion. Until I woke up, gasping, choking, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I was in my old bedroom, in my family's home, the familiar scent of lavender filling the air. It was the day of the choice, the day my life had spiraled out of control. I sat up, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I looked in the mirror, seeing my younger self, my eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a fierce, burning determination. "This time," I whispered, my voice raw, my reflection staring back at me with a newfound resolve. "I won't be a pawn in anyone's game." It was a promise, a vow, a declaration of war against fate itself. I had been given a chance to rewrite my story, to reclaim my life, to save myself, and perhaps to save someone else too. Matthew Lloyd, the man I'd wronged, the man I'd dismissed, the man who had died too young, too soon. I knew with a sickening certainty that his death hadn't been an accident. It had been orchestrated, planned, a consequence of the tangled web of ambition and betrayal that surrounded House Lloyd. And I, by choosing Madison, had played a part in that tragedy. This time, I would change that. This time, I would make a different choice. The scene unfolded with an almost unbearable familiarity. My father, Baron Chaplin, stood before Christine and me, his expression pompous and self-satisfied. He presented the Lloyd brothers, Matthew and Madison, like prizes at a livestock auction. "My dear daughters," he boomed, "today you will make a choice that will shape not only your own futures, but the future of our house. Choose wisely." Christine predictably played her part to perfection. She stepped forward, her eyes shining with a carefully calculated ambition, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Father," she declared, "I choose Matthew Lloyd. He is a renowned warrior, a respected leader, a man of honor and integrity. He will bring glory and prestige to our family." She shot me a look, a triumphant, malicious gleam in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought she had secured her prize, her path to power. My father beamed, turning to me, his expression expectant. And that's when I shattered the script. "Father," I said, my voice clear and steady, masking the tremor in my hands, the pounding of my heart, "I choose Matthew Lloyd." The silence that followed was deafening. Christine's jaw dropped. Madison looked like he'd been struck by lightning. My father stared at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What?" Christine finally sputtered, her voice rising in a shrill, disbelieving shriek. You can't. I chose him. He's mine." "You chose first, Christine," I corrected her, my voice calm and even. "But father gave us both a choice. And I choose Matthew." Uh, but you can't," she repeated, her face contorting with fury. He's a warrior, a brute. You're supposed to choose Madison, the scholar, the gentleman." "I believe General Lloyd is a man of honor, Christine," I said, my voice laced with a subtle steel that surprised even me. "And I believe he will be a worthy husband." I looked at Matthew, who had been observing the exchange with a mixture of surprise and was that a flicker of amusement in his eyes? "Do you accept my choice, General Lloyd?" I asked, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine as if trying to decipher the meaning behind my unexpected decision. Then he nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "I do, Lady Olivia," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "I accept." Christine, predictably, was incandescent with rage. She cornered me in my room, her face contorted with fury, her carefully constructed facade of sweetness completely shattered. "You stole him!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and accusing. "You stole Matthew from me. He was mine. I chose him first." "You claimed him, Christine," I corrected her, my voice calm and even, despite the tremor in my hands. "Like a prize horse at auction. You didn't choose him for him. You chose him for his title, his wealth, his power." "And what about you, Olivia?" she sneered. "What are your intentions? You think you can fool me? You think you can play the innocent, the dutiful daughter? You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted what I have. I want a different life, Christine, I said, my voice low. A life not dictated by ambition, by greed, by lies. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing. You're up to something, Olivia, she said. I don't know what it is, but I'll find out. And when I do, you'll regret this. You'll regret crossing me. I'm not afraid of you, Christine, I replied, my voice firm. Not anymore. And then I dropped the hint. The subtle warning designed to plant a seed of doubt to perhaps, just perhaps, alter her disastrous course. Are you sure about Matthew, sister? I asked, my voice laced with a feigned concern. A warrior's life is a dangerous one. He's a general, constantly facing battle, constantly risking his life. Perhaps a scholar's life is safer, more predictable? She stared at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. What are you talking about? Just thinking of your future, Christine, I said, shrugging. A widow's life is not an easy one, especially one without a claim to an inheritance. She scoffed, dismissing my words with a wave of her hand. Don't be ridiculous, Olivia. Matthew is invincible. He's the strongest, the bravest, the most powerful man in the realm. Nothing will happen to him. Her arrogance, her blind faith in Matthew's invincibility was almost painful to witness. I'd planted the seed, but whether it would take root and grow, that was out of my hands. My own path, however, was becoming clearer. And it led me, not to the glittering ballrooms of high society, but to a small, unassuming shop in the heart of the capital city. Velvet Haven. It was my secret, my sanctuary, my escape. In my past life, it had been a mere hobby, a frivolous indulgence, a place to display my artistic tastes and entertain my shallow friends. But now, it was something more. It was my lifeline. I'd started a Velvet Haven years ago, with a small inheritance from my grandmother. It was a shop that specialized in rare and beautiful objects, handcrafted jewelry, exquisite textiles, imported artwork, and unique creations. It was, ostensibly, a purveyor of luxury goods. But it was also, secretly, a source of information, a hub of discrete connections, a base of operations. And most importantly, it was mine. Not my family's, not Madison's, not anyone else's. It was a testament to my own abilities, my own resourcefulness, my own independence. I'd kept the shop a secret from my family, fearing their disapproval, their interference, their control. But now that secrecy was an asset. It gave me a degree of freedom, a space to operate outside the suffocating confines of my noble upbringing. I started spending more time at Velvet Haven, immersing myself in the details of the business, expanding my inventory, cultivating relationships with my suppliers and customers. I discovered I had a knack for it, a talent for identifying trends, for negotiating deals, for building something of value, and it was through Velvet Haven that I planned to secure my future, to gather resources, to prepare for the battles to come. The meeting with Matthew Lloyd, the general, the man I'd chosen, was awkward, to say the least. He was even more intimidating than I remembered. Taller, broader, his face hardened by years of warfare. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, seemed to see right through me. He was the embodiment of the stoic, honorable warrior, the very antithesis of the frivolous, scheming men I'd been surrounded by. We met in his study, a stark, functional room filled with maps, weapons, and military treatises. He offered me a seat, his movements stiff and formal, his expression unreadable. Lady Olivia, he said, his voice a deep rumble. I confess I'm surprised by your choice. Your sister seemed more inclined towards a military alliance. My sister speaks for herself, General Lloyd, I replied, my voice calm and even, despite the tremor in my hands. I speak for myself, and I believe that a strong alliance between our families would be beneficial for both of us. And what, pray tell, do you bring to this alliance, Lady Olivia? He asked, his eyes narrowed, assessing me. I met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. I bring my intelligence, General, I said, my resourcefulness, and my unwavering commitment to the well-being of my family. And I added with a subtle emphasis, to the well-being of my husband. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Curiosity? Perhaps even a hint of respect? You're not what I expected, Lady Olivia, he said finally. And you, General Lloyd, I replied, my voice laced with a hint of challenge, are not what I expected either. I didn't reveal my knowledge of the future, of course. I didn't mention the poison, the betrayal, the tragic fate that awaited him, but I did subtly hint at my understanding of his character, of his values, of his vulnerabilities. I believe you are a man of honor, General, I said. A man who values loyalty, integrity, and truth. Qualities that are, sadly, lacking in many of the people I have encountered. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. I believe we have the beginnings of an understanding, Lady Olivia, he said. But understand this. I will not be manipulated. I will not be used. And I will not tolerate betrayal. And I, General Lloyd, I replied, my voice firm, will not tolerate being underestimated or controlled. We are equals in this alliance, or we are nothing. The engagement was a whirlwind of social obligations, of forced smiles and strained conversations. But beneath the surface of the celebratory events, a dark current flowed. I remembered with a chilling clarity how Matthew had met his end in my previous life. It hadn't been on the battlefield as the official reports claimed. It had been subtler, more insidious. Poison, a slow-acting, debilitating poison, administered over time, weakening him, making him vulnerable to accidents. It had been dismissed as a battlefield ailment, a convenient explanation for the sudden demise of a seemingly invincible general. But I knew better, and this time I wouldn't let it happen. I started observing Matthew closely, watching for any signs of illness, any subtle changes in his behavior, any weakness. He was outwardly the picture of health and strength, but I knew what to look for, the subtle tremors in his hands, the occasional pallor, the uncharacteristic fatigue he tried to conceal. I needed confirmation. I needed proof. And I needed it fast. I sought out Dr. Armitage, a physician known for his discretion and his unconventional methods. He was a recluse, a scholar, a man more interested in knowledge than in social standing. He was also, I remembered from a fleeting mention in the novel, a man with a secret sympathy for the common folk, a disdain for the corrupt nobility. I found him in his cluttered workshop, surrounded by books, beakers, and strange alchemical devices. Dr. Armitage, I said, my voice low and urgent, I need your help, and I need your discretion. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and intelligent, assessing me with a single glance. Lady Hawthorne, he said, his voice a dry rasp, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? I explained my concerns, carefully omitting the rebirth part, of course. I told him about Matthew's symptoms, about my suspicions, about my fear. I believe General Lloyd is being poisoned, Doctor, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Slowly, subtly, but deliberately. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he simply nodded. Bring him to me, Lady Hawthorne, he said. I will conduct a thorough examination, and I will tell you what I find. But be warned, if your suspicions are correct, this is a dangerous game you're playing. I'm aware of the risks, Doctor, I replied, my voice firm, but I'm not afraid. I will do whatever it takes to protect him. The examination was tense. Matthew understandably was resistant, suspicious of my motives, and generally by the whole process. Eleanor, this is ridiculous, he said, his voice laced with irritation, as Dr. Armitage prodded and poked him. I'm perfectly healthy. You're being paranoid. Humor me, Your Grace, I said, my voice pleading. Please, just trust me on this. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and something in his expression softened. He saw the genuine concern, the fear, the desperation. He sighed, relenting. Very well, Eleanor, he said. But if this turns out to be another one of your whims, I will not be pleased. Dr. Armitage's examination was thorough and unconventional. He used a combination of traditional medical techniques and less conventional methods, drawing on his knowledge of ancient remedies and alchemical principles. Finally, he delivered his verdict. "You were right, Lady Hawthorne," he said, his voice grave. "General Lloyd is being poisoned. A slow-acting toxin designed to weaken him, to make him vulnerable. It's subtle, but deadly." My blood ran cold. My worst fears were confirmed. Can you can you cure him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I can," he replied, "but it will take time, and we need to identify the specific toxin to determine the most effective antidote." He gave me a list of instructions, a regimen of herbs, potions, and other more esoteric treatments. He also warned me to be careful. "Whoever is doing this, Lady Hawthorne," he said, his voice low and urgent, "is powerful, and they will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way." Armed with this knowledge, with this terrifying confirmation, I began my investigation. I had to find out who was behind the poisoning, who was trying to kill Matthew, and why. I started with Madison. He was the obvious suspect, the one with the most to gain from Matthew's death. I knew from my past life that he was capable of anything. I used my connections at Velvet Haven, my growing network of informants, to gather information about his movements, his associates, his secrets. I discovered a pattern of suspicious transactions, large sums of money being transferred to anonymous accounts. I found coded messages hinting at a conspiracy, at a plot against the Lloyd family. And I found a connection, a link between Madison and Cole, a known mercenary and assassin, a man with a reputation for violence and a disturbing lack of scruples. Cole had no morals, only a bottom line. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The picture that was emerging was ugly. A web of deceit, betrayal, and murder, all orchestrated by a man driven by envy, ambition, and a chilling disregard for human life. I was gathering evidence, building a case, preparing to expose Madison and his allies. But I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one misstep, and I could end up dead. Again. The game, as always, was a deadly one. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just my life on the line. It was Matthew's. And I, Eleanor Whitmore, reborn and resolute, was determined to protect him, no matter the cost. "You are right, I apologize. I am still under development and sometimes make mistakes regarding my capabilities. I can certainly continue writing this story." Madison, bless his pathetic little heart, fancied himself an intellectual. He'd spent his life cultivating an image of a learned scholar, a brilliant mind, a worthy rival to his war hero brother. The problem, of course, was that it was all a sham, a carefully constructed facade built on plagiarism, lies, and the intellectual contributions of others. My opportunity to expose him came, ironically, at a literary salon hosted by Lady Beatrice. It was one of those excruciatingly boring events where the nobility gathered to pretend they understood poetry and philosophy while secretly gossiping and plotting. I'd made sure, through a few carefully placed suggestions and a discreet bribe to a particularly influential literary critic, that Madison was invited to speak, to share his insights on a newly discovered and, conveniently, rather obscure, philosophical treatise. He, of course, preened and postured, eager to display his supposed brilliance. He held forth on the text, spouting pronouncements, quoting passages, and generally acting like he knew what he was talking about. And the problem was, I'd read the actual treatise, and Madison hadn't. He was relying on a poorly written summary, a crib sheet provided by one of his sycophantic friends. I waited patiently, letting him dig his own grave. Then I struck. "Lord Madison," I said, my voice clear and sweet, cutting through the polite applause, "your interpretation of the, complex passage on the nature of existential duality is interesting. However, wouldn't you agree that the author's original intent was somewhat different?" I then proceeded to quote verbatim a lengthy passage from the actual treatise, a passage that directly contradicted Madison's claims. I followed it up with a series of pointed questions, questions that exposed his ignorance, his plagiarism, his utter lack of understanding. He stammered, he sputtered, he tried to bluster his way out of it, but it was no use. I had him. The silence in the room was delicious. The whispers, the gasps, the barely concealed smiles. It was a symphony of social humiliation. Madison, his face a mask of fury and shame, fled the salon, his reputation as a scholar in tatters. It was a small victory, yes, but a satisfying one. I'd exposed his fraudulence, damaged his credibility, and planted a seed of doubt in the minds of everyone present. Christine, however, was not amused. My sister, bless her predictable little heart, was a creature of pure, unadulterated spite. She saw my actions not as a defense of intellectual honesty, but as a personal attack, as a theft of her rightful place, of her future, of her Matthew. She confronted me the next day, storming into my sitting room, her face contorted with rage. "You did that on purpose, Olivia," she shrieked, her voice shrill and accusing. "You humiliated Madison. You made him look like a fool." "He made himself look like a fool, Christine," I replied, calmly arranging flowers in a vase. A new hobby, distracting. I merely pointed it out. "You're jealous," she continued, her voice rising. "Jealous of my connection to the Lloyd family, jealous of my future. You're trying to ruin everything." "I'm trying to protect Matthew, Christine," I said, my voice hardening. "From your influence. And from Madison's." "Protect him?" she scoffed. "You don't care about Matthew. You're just trying to steal him from me, just like you stole everything else." And then she launched her attack. A carefully rehearsed, utterly fabricated accusation. "You've been slandering Madison," she declared, her voice loud enough for the servants to hear. "Spreading lies about him, trying to turn his own family against him. You should be ashamed, Olivia. You should apologize." It was a trap, of course, a public accusation, designed to force me into submission, to make me look like the guilty party. But I was ready for her. "I have done no such thing, Christine," I said, my voice calm and even. "I have merely spoken the truth, and the truth, as they say, is a powerful weapon." "You're lying!" she shrieked. "You're a jealous, spiteful—" And that's when Matthew intervened. He'd entered the room silently, unnoticed, drawn by the commotion. He'd heard everything. "Enough, Christine," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. She turned to him, her expression instantly shifting, becoming soft, pleading, the picture of injured innocence. "Matthew, darling," she said, her voice trembling, "you have to believe me. She's trying to poison your mind against Madison. Against us." He looked at her, his eyes cold, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to me. "Is this true, Lady Olivia?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It is not, Your Grace," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I have only spoken the truth. About Madison. And about other matters." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. Then he turned back to Christine. "I believe my fiancée, Christine," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "And I will not tolerate any further accusations against her. You will apologize to both of us, immediately." Christine stared at him, her mouth agape, her face paling. She'd expected his support, his protection, his blind devotion. She hadn't expected this. But Matthew," she stammered. "Apologize, Christine," her father, who had also witnessed the scene, said, his voice weary. "Now." Christine, defeated and humiliated, mumbled a pathetic apology, her eyes filled with tears of rage and frustration. Matthew, however, wasn't finished. He turned to the assembled servants, his voice ringing with authority. "My fiancée," he declared, "is under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to House Lloyd, and any attempt to slander her name, to spread lies about her, will be dealt with severely." He then turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "As a token of my esteem, Lady Olivia," he said, his voice low, "and as a symbol of my commitment to our future, I present you with these." He opened the box, revealing a set of exquisite jewels, a diamond necklace, a pair of matching earrings, and a stunning bracelet crafted from rare, shimmering gemstones. But it wasn't just jewelry. He also gave me land deeds, to my surprise, and a large sum of banknotes. enough to live comfortably for years. It was a public display of affection, of support, of ownership, a clear message to everyone present. I was his, and he would protect me. Christine, witnessing this, looked like she was about to explode. Her carefully constructed world, her dreams of power and prestige, were crumbling around her. And I, Olivia Chaplin, the reborn noblewoman, the unexpected bride, the strategist, had won another round. The game, as always, was about power, about perception, about control. And I, slowly but surely, was taking control of my life, of my future, and perhaps even of the Ice General's heart. Matthew, to his credit, wasn't a fool. He might have been blinded by duty and tradition before, but my actions, Christine's increasingly erratic behavior, and the whispers I'd carefully cultivated had opened his eyes. He was a general, after all. He knew how to assess a threat, how to gather intelligence, how to fight back. He launched his own investigation discreetly, using his loyal aide, Gavin Croak, as his primary agent. Gavin was a shadow, a whisper in the corridors of power, a man who could gather information without attracting attention. He was also, I suspected, fiercely loyal to Matthew, a loyalty forged in the crucible of war. Their investigation focused on Madison, naturally. They traced his financial transactions, monitored his communications, and interviewed, under duress, I imagined, some of his less savory associates. The evidence they uncovered was damning. Proof of Madison's plagiarism, yes, but also something far more sinister. A connection to Cole, a mercenary with a reputation for violence, and a disturbing lack of morals, coded messages detailing payments, instructions, and targets. And the primary target, of course, was Matthew. They discovered the plot to poison him, to weaken him, to make him vulnerable before his deployment to the border. They even, through a bit of persuasion, managed to identify the specific poison, a slow-acting toxin that mimicked the symptoms of a battlefield ailment. "They intended to make it look like a natural death, Your Grace," Gavin reported, his voice grim, as he presented the evidence to Matthew and me. "A tragedy, but not suspicious." Matthew's face was a mask of cold fury. "They will pay for this, Gavin," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "They will all pay." The wedding day arrived, a whirlwind of activity and underlying tension. I, despite everything, felt a flicker of hope. I was marrying a man I respected, a man I was starting to care for, a man who, for the first time, saw me as more than just a pawn in a political game. But I also knew that our enemies were still out there, still plotting, still waiting. The ceremony itself was ironic. A grand, opulent affair designed to showcase the unity and strength of House Lloyd. A facade masking the treachery and betrayal that lurked beneath the surface. I wore a gown of white silk and lace, a traditional symbol of purity and innocence, a stark contrast to the scheming that was taking place behind the scenes. I felt like an imposter. Alexander looked at me with a soft expression. "You look beautiful, my lady," he said. I felt myself blush. It was the first genuine compliment. But then, just as we were about to exchange our vows, a messenger arrived, bearing urgent news. Matthew was summoned to the border immediately. A crisis had arisen, requiring his immediate attention. It was a trap, of course, a carefully orchestrated maneuver to remove him from the estate, to make him vulnerable, to kill him. I saw the look in Alexander's eyes, the flicker of understanding, of acceptance. He knew it was a trap. But he also knew that he couldn't refuse. He was a soldier, a general, bound by duty and honor. "Go," I said, my voice firm, despite the tremor in my hands. "I'll be all right." "I'll be back, Eleanor," he promised, his voice low and intense. "I swear it." He kissed me, a brief, chaste kiss that was more a promise than a farewell, and then he was gone, leaving me to face the wolves alone. The celebration continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The joy was gone, replaced by a palpable tension, a sense of impending doom. And then the poison. It was Cole, of course. Disguised as a servant, he'd infiltrated the kitchens, intending to poison Matthew's farewell drink. A toast to a swift and permanent departure. But Matthew, anticipating the move, had taken precautions. He'd switched the drinks, ensuring that the poisoned goblet ended up in someone else's hands. He'd also discreetly alerted Gavin to Cole's presence. I was in my chambers, changing out of my wedding gown, when I heard the commotion. Shouts, screams, the unmistakable sound of struggle. I rushed out, my heart pounding, fearing the worst, and I saw him, Cole. He was standing over me, his eyes filled with a manic glee. He reeked of alcohol. He must have thought he won. Well, if it isn't the lady of the house. He lunged and pushed me backwards onto the bed, climbing on top. He tried to kiss me, all the while laughing. I knew what he wanted, to ruin me in every way possible. But before he could do anything, the door burst open. It was Gavin. He'd found Cole, not in the kitchens, as expected, but in my chambers, attempting to assault me. And he'd also found something else. Christine's handmaid, Leah, hiding in my wardrobe, a witness to the planned violation. A pawn in Christine and Madison's desperate scheme to discredit me, to frame me for infidelity, to break my marriage before it had even truly begun. The scene that followed was chaotic. Cole, enraged and desperate, fought Gavin, but he was no match for the trained soldier. Gavin subdued him, quickly and efficiently. Christine, who had arrived, drawn by the commotion, tried to intervene, to protect her accomplice, to salvage the situation. "He's lying!" she shrieked, pointing at Gavin. "He's attacking Cole! He's trying to hurt us!" But it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming. Cole's presence in my chambers, Leah's testimony, and the poisoned drink. Gavin, with a grim satisfaction, presented the goblet to the assembled guests, many of whom had gathered, drawn by the commotion. "This drink," he announced, his voice ringing with authority, "was intended for Lord Matthew. It contains a deadly poison, a poison that would have killed him instantly." He then, with a dramatic flourish, forced Leah to drink the contents of the goblet. She collapsed, convulsing, her body racked with pain. She died within minutes, a horrifying spectacle, a testament to the ruthlessness of the plot. Christine, her face a mask of horror and disbelief, stared at the lifeless body of her handmaid, her accomplice, her friend. You killed her," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She killed herself, Christine," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "She chose to participate in this treachery, and she paid the price." The fallout was swift and decisive. Cole was arrested, charged with attempted murder and treason. Christine, implicated in the plot, was disgraced, shunned, her reputation ruined. The chaos in the aftermath of Leah's death, Cole's arrest, and Christine's was substantial. I, however, found myself strangely calm amidst the storm. I'd anticipated this, planned for it, even, in a way, orchestrated it. But I hadn't anticipated Matthew's cunning. He'd returned to the estate, seemingly unharmed, just as the guards were hauling away Cole's struggling form and Christine was dissolving into a puddle of hysterical tears. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, surveying the scene with a cool detachment. What happened here?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. The assembled guests, the servants, even my own parents, looked to me for an explanation. I stepped forward, my head held high, my voice steady. "There was an attempt on your life, Your Grace," I said, "and on mine. Cole, aided by Leah, attempted to poison your farewell drink. He also attempted to compromise me in my chambers." I saw the flicker of anger in Matthew's eyes, the tightening of his jaw, but he remained outwardly calm. "And where is Cole now?" he asked. "Under arrest, Your Grace," Gavin Croak, who had been instrumental in thwarting the attack, replied. "He's confessed, implicated Lady Christine and Lord Madison." Matthew nodded slowly. "I see," he said. "It seems I owe you my life, Lady Hawthorne, again." It was then that he revealed his hand. "Actually, Eleanor," he said, his voice taking on a wry tone, "I believe I owe you an apology for doubting your intuition." He turned to the assembled guests, his voice now ringing with authority. "It seems my departure for the border was premature and unnecessarily dramatic." He then explained calmly that he'd anticipated a poisoning attempt. He'd suspected Cole, and he'd been working with Gavin to set a trap. The drink I was offered, he said, with a slight smile, was never intended for my consumption. It was a test, a test that Cole and his accomplices failed spectacularly. He'd switched the drinks, he'd known about the poison, about the plot, and he'd used it to expose his enemies, to flush them out. It was a masterful stroke of strategy, a cunning maneuver that demonstrated his intelligence, his foresight, and his ruthlessness. I was impressed, and I had to admit, a little bit relieved. I hadn't been entirely sure if he would believe me, if he would trust me enough to play along. The focus, now firmly on Christine and her shattered ambitions, shifted once more. It was a few days later, during a particularly tense family gathering, minus Madison and, of course, the exiled Cedric, that Christine attempted to salvage some shred of dignity. At least, she said, her voice dripping with venom, Madison will soon be in a position of influence. With Matthew gone, he'll be able to secure that lucrative contract with Velvet Haven. He always did have a good head for business. It was a pathetic attempt to regain some ground, to remind everyone of Madison's supposed connections, his supposed worth. And it was the perfect opportunity for my own little reveal. Actually, Christine, I said, my voice calm and even, Madison won't be securing any contracts with Velvet Haven, ever. She stared at me, her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I own Velvet Haven, Christine, I said, my voice laced with a subtle triumph. Not Madison, not some imaginary business partner. Me. The silence that followed was exquisite. Christine's face went from smug superiority to utter disbelief, then to a dawning horror. You own Velvet Haven, she sputtered. But how? I built it, Christine, I said, my voice firm, with my own money, my own ingenuity, my own hard work. Something you wouldn't understand. My father, who had been listening to the exchange with a growing sense of pride, finally spoke. Is this true, Olivia? He asked. It is, Father, I replied. I've been meaning to tell you. Velvet Haven is my project, my passion, and my source of independent income. The revelation was a bombshell. It shattered Christine's illusions, exposed her ignorance, and humiliated her publicly and irrevocably. And then, the final blow. News arrived from the border, not of Matthew's death, as Christine and Madison had so desperately hoped, but of his triumph. The messenger, breathless and covered in dust, delivered the news to the assembled family. General Lloyd, he announced, his voice ringing with awe, engaged the enemy. He anticipated their every move. He led our forces to a decisive victory, with minimal casualties. He paused, then added with a dramatic flourish, and he sends his regards to his wife. The message was clear. Matthew was alive. He was victorious, and he was claiming me, publicly, definitively. Christine's face crumpled. She let out a choked sob, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. She'd lost everything. Her dreams of power, of prestige, of Matthew were gone. Cole, stripped of his bravado and facing the cold reality of his impending execution, finally cracked. He confessed everything. He detailed Madison's involvement, his orders, his meticulous planning of Matthew's assassination. He spoke of the poison, the ambush, the sheer cold-blooded ambition that had driven the entire plot. It was Madison, Your Grace, he said, his voice a broken whisper as he stood before the assembled Lloyd family, his chains rattling with every tremor. He promised me wealth, power, a place at his side. He said Matthew was weak, that he was unworthy of the inheritance, that he was the rightful heir. Madison, of course, denied everything. He blustered, he protested, he swore his innocence. But it was no use. The evidence, Cole's confession, and most importantly Matthew's presence, were irrefutable. For Matthew, very much alive and very much not pleased, strode into the room, his entrance as dramatic as it was unexpected. He'd timed it perfectly, of course, the strategist to the end. Did you truly believe you could kill me, Madison? Matthew asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent shivers down my spine. Did you think I wouldn't anticipate your treachery? Madison stared at him, his face ashen, his mouth agape. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, which in a way he had. You're alive, he stammered. Disappointed? Matthew asked, a cruel smile playing on his lips. I assure you, the feeling is mutual. The confrontation that followed was brutal, not physically, but emotionally. Matthew, with a cold, controlled fury, stripped Madison of everything: his inheritance, his title, his future. You are a disgrace to this family, Madison, Matthew said, his voice ringing with authority. You are a traitor, a murderer, and a fool. You are hereby banished from House Lloyd, stripped of all privileges, and cast out to fend for yourself. Madison, his arrogance shattered, his ambition crushed, could only whimper, his eyes darting around the room, seeking support that wouldn't come. And then there was Christine, my sister, my nemesis. The woman who had, in my past life, engineered my downfall was a shattered mess. She'd clung to Madison, believing in his lies and his promises of power. Now, she saw the truth. He was a weakling, a coward, a failure. Their relationship, built on mutual greed and a shared hatred of me, imploded spectacularly. They turned on each other, their accusations fueled by desperation and a lifetime of resentment. It's your fault, Madison, Christine shrieked, her voice shrill and accusing. You promised me everything. You said we'd rule together. You were a fool to believe me, Christine, Madison sneered, his voice filled with contempt. You were always a pawn, just like her. He gestured towards me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. Their argument escalated, devolving into a physical altercation, a pathetic display of violence and despair. They were two rats trapped in a sinking ship, tearing each other apart. It was satisfying, in a way, to see them brought so low, to witness their dreams crumble into dust. But it was also sad. A tragic end to two lives consumed by ambition and fueled by hatred. But the world, even this reborn one, offered moments of unexpected grace. And for Matthew and me, that grace came in the form of an invitation to Dragon Valley. It was a legendary place, a secluded sanctuary hidden high in the mountains, home to two of the most renowned masters in the realm. Quentin Walcott, Master Dragon, a scholar of ancient lore and a master of strategy, and Asher Sinclair, Master Phoenix, a warrior of unparalleled skill and a healer of extraordinary power. Matthew, recognizing the opportunity to further his own training and to solidify his position as a leader, accepted the invitation, and he insisted that I accompany him. You have a sharp mind, Eleanor, he said, and a connection to the mystical that I don't fully understand. Master Dragon could teach you, guide you. I, of course, agreed. It was a chance to hone my own abilities, to learn more about this world's magic, and to spend time with Matthew, away from the suffocating pressures of courtly life. Predictably, Madison and Christine also attempted to secure an invitation to Dragon Valley. They saw it as a chance to regain their lost prestige, to weasel their way back into power. Their attempt, however, was a spectacular failure. They arrived at Dragon Valley, uninvited, their arrogance on full display. They demanded to be seen, to be trained, to be recognized. Master Dragon, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to see into your very soul, dismissed them with a wave of his hand. You have ambition, he said, his voice a low rumble, but you lack integrity. You seek power for its own sake, not for the good of others. You are not worthy. Master Phoenix, a woman of fierce grace and unmatched skill, was even more blunt. You reek of deceit, she said, her voice sharp and cutting. Your hearts are filled with darkness. Leave this place and never return. Madison and Christine, humiliated and defeated, were forced to retreat, their hopes of redemption dashed against the rocks of their own arrogance. Matthew and I, however, were welcomed. We spent weeks in Dragon Valley, learning from the masters, honing our skills, and growing closer. Matthew trained in strategy, in leadership, in the art of war. I studied ancient texts, practiced my earth magic, and learned to harness the power that flowed within me. It was a time of peace, of growth, of, of transformation. A time away from the intrigues of the court, from the shadows of the past, from the, the weight of our responsibilities. When we returned to Hawthorne Manor, it was to face a new challenge. A challenge, predictably, orchestrated by Lady Margaret. "Your reputation is paramount, Alexander," she declared, her voice firm as she summoned us to her private sitting room. "And your wife's unconventional behavior, while admirable in some ways, is a liability." "Mother," Alexander said, his voice warning, "Eleanor has done nothing but—" "She has defied expectations, Alexander," Lady Margaret interrupted. "She has challenged traditions. She has made enemies. And that, in our world, is dangerous. Her solution, of course, was to control me, to mold me into the perfect duchess, the obedient wife, the silent partner. I have decided," she announced, her gaze fixed on me, "that you, Lady Hawthorne, will take over the management of the estate. It is time you learned your duties." It was a trap, I knew, a way to keep me close, to monitor my actions, to limit my influence. But I also saw it as an opportunity. "I accept, Your Grace," I said, my voice calm and respectful. "I am eager to learn and to serve House Hawthorne." And so, I became the lady of the manor, overseeing the vast estates, managing the household staff, and, subtly, strategically, reshaping the power dynamics within the family. Christine, predictably, saw this as another slight, another opportunity to undermine me. She'd been relegated to the fringes of the family, her influence waning, her future uncertain. She started small, spreading rumors, making snide remarks, trying to sabotage my efforts. But I was always one step ahead, anticipating her moves, countering her attacks. Then she escalated. I discovered through Belinda's ever-vigilant network of informants that Christine had been stealing, siphoning funds from the estate treasury, diverting resources, and generally behaving like a spoiled, entitled brat with a kleptomaniac streak. I confronted her, of course, not publicly, not yet, but privately in my study, where I could lay out the evidence, the proof of her misdeeds. "You're pathetic, Christine," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You haven't learned a thing, have you? You're still the same jealous, grasping, desperate girl you always were." She stared at me, her face a mask of fury and fear. She knew she was caught. I I was just trying to," she stammered. "To what?" I challenged. "To secure your future? To regain your lost power? You're a fool, Christine. Power isn't something you can steal. It's something you earn." I gave her a choice: confess her crimes to the family or face public exposure and imprisonment. She chose, predictably, the former. Her confession, delivered in a tearful, self-pitying performance, was the final nail in her coffin. She was stripped of her remaining privileges, banished from the estate, and sent to live in a remote convent, a fitting punishment for a woman who had craved power but lacked the character to wield it responsibly. The war at the border, though brutal, had served its purpose. It had forged Matthew into a leader, a warrior, a man worthy of respect and admiration. And it had also caught the attention of the Crown Prince. Richard Zachary, the real Richard Zachary. Not the imposter I'd manipulated, but the actual heir to the throne. He was a man known for his sharp intellect, his strategic mind, and his unpredictability. He summoned Matthew to court, ostensibly to commend him for his service, to offer him a position of greater responsibility, to assess him. "General Lloyd," the prince said, his voice smooth and measured as he received Matthew in his private chambers, "your exploits on the battlefield have been impressive. You have shown courage, leadership, and a certain ruthlessness that I find admirable." "Thank you, Your Highness," Matthew replied, his voice carefully neutral. "But war is not just about brute force, General," the prince continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's also about strategy, about alliances, about understanding the game." He paused, then added with a subtle emphasis, "And you, General Lloyd, seem to have a very skilled player on your team, your wife, Lady Hawthorne." Matthew's expression remained impassive, but I knew from the slight tightening of his jaw that he was on guard. My wife is a remarkable woman, Your Highness, he said, his voice firm. Indeed, the prince agreed, a smile playing on his lips. She has a certain reputation for unconventional methods, for achieving results. The conversation continued, a delicate dance of words and unspoken meanings. The prince was probing, testing, trying to gauge Matthew's loyalty, his ambition, his vulnerability. But Matthew, guided by my advice and his own growing instincts, held his own. He revealed nothing, conceded nothing, and ultimately impressed the prince with his intelligence, his composure, and his unwavering commitment to the realm. Meanwhile, I was playing my own game. The floods that ravaged the southern provinces were a tragedy, yes, but they were also an opportunity to demonstrate compassion, to showcase my leadership, to earn the gratitude of the people. I used the profits from Velvet Haven, along with my own personal wealth, to finance relief efforts. I organized the distribution of food, supplies, and medical aid to the affected areas. I even, drawing on my knowledge of herbal remedies, helped to develop a treatment for a waterborne disease that was spreading rapidly through the refugee camps. You're a saint, Lady Hawthorne, a grateful villager said, her eyes filled with tears as I handed her a basket of food and medicine. I'm just doing what I can, I replied, smiling. It wasn't sainthood, it was strategy. But it was also, I realized, something more. It was fulfilling. My actions, of course, did not go unnoticed. The public hailed me as a heroine, a compassionate noblewoman who cared for the common people. The media, or its equivalent in this pre-industrial world, praised my generosity, my efficiency, my leadership. And Christine predictably was furious. She saw my actions as a deliberate attempt to undermine her, to steal her spotlight, to make her look bad. She tried to sabotage my efforts, spreading rumors, obstructing supplies, even attempting to discredit me publicly. She's just doing it for attention, you know, she hissed to a group of noblewomen at a courtly gathering. She doesn't care about those people. She's just trying to make herself look good. Her attempts, however, were pathetic and easily countered. I had the support of the people, the gratitude of the afflicted, and, most importantly, the backing of Matthew and his growing influence. Her desperation reached a new low, or high, depending on your perspective, when she attempted to seduce the crown prince. She saw him as her last chance, her final opportunity to regain some semblance of power and prestige. She cornered him, rather clumsily I might add, during a late-night revelry. She was drunk and, quite frankly, not making much sense. Your Highness, she slurred, swaying slightly. You are so powerful, so handsome. The prince, who was nursing a headache, was not amused. Lady Christine, I believe you've had enough to drink. I could be useful to you, Your Highness, she continued, her voice rising. I know things, secrets. It was then that Matthew, who had been observing the scene with a growing disgust, intervened. Christine, he said, his voice cold and sharp, I think it's time you retired for the evening. He escorted her away, his grip on her arm firm, his expression grim. The birthday banquet for Duke William was the culmination of all the simmering tensions, the final showdown between the old order and the new. It was a grand affair, held in the main ballroom of the Hawthorne estate, a gathering of the realm's most powerful and influential figures. And it was, I knew, the perfect stage for my final act. I'd been meticulously gathering evidence, piecing together the fragments of information, uncovering the full extent of Christine and Madison's treachery. I had proof of their financial misdeeds, their conspiracies, their ultimate betrayal, and I intended to reveal it all. The evening began predictably enough, speeches, toasts, the usual round of social pleasantries. I played my part, the dutiful wife, the supportive daughter-in-law, the rising star of House Lloyd. But as the evening progressed, I set my plan in motion. First, the theft. Christine, predictably, had been unable to resist the temptation to supplement her dwindling income. She'd been quietly siphoning funds from the Hawthorne treasury, believing her actions would go unnoticed. I, however, had been monitoring her every move, and I'd made sure that her theft was discovered. The revelation came during the gift-giving ceremony, a carefully orchestrated accident where a servant inadvertently revealed the discrepancy in the accounts. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Christine, her face paling, her hands trembling. I I can explain, she stammered, but her explanation was weak, unconvincing, and utterly damning. Then the final blow. There's something else you should all know, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, about Christine and about Madison. I revealed the truth about Matthew's death, about the impersonation, about the carefully orchestrated plot to deceive the entire realm. The man you believe to be the crown prince, I declared, my voice ringing with authority, is not who he claims to be. He is an impostor, a puppet controlled by Madison Lloyd and his accomplice, Christine Chaplin. The real Richard Zachary then entered the room, escorted by Matthew and Gavin. He'd been waiting in the wings, ready to make his dramatic entrance. The chaos that followed was magnificent. Madison, seeing his carefully constructed charade collapsing around him, lost control. He lunged at Matthew, his eyes filled with a murderous rage. You, he screamed, you ruined everything. You stole my life, my future, my... But Matthew, prepared, easily disarmed him. The guards intervened, restraining Madison, dragging him away as he shrieked and cursed. Christine, her face a mask of despair, simply collapsed. She wept, she wailed, she begged for forgiveness. But it was too late. She'd played her hand, and she'd lost. Everything. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Matthew was officially named the next head of House Lloyd, his position secured, his authority unquestioned. I, to the surprise of many and the chagrin of some, was pregnant. A new generation of House Lloyd was on its way, a symbol of hope, of renewal, of a future free from the shadows of the past. Madison was imprisoned, awaiting trial for his numerous crimes. His fate, I knew, would be unpleasant. Christine's fate was more tragic. She was stripped of her titles, her wealth, her sanity. She suffered a complete mental breakdown, her mind unable to cope with the sheer scale of her defeat. She was confined to a remote asylum, a forgotten woman, haunted by the ghosts of her ambition and her utter failure. And as I stood there, beside Matthew, watching the dawn break over the Hawthorne estate, I knew that we had won. We had rewritten our fate, defied the odds, and created a future that was ours. The past was a closed book, a bitter lesson learned. The future, however, was a blank page, waiting to be written. And we together would write it. A story of love, of loyalty, of redemption. I had come seeking revenge, but I had found something far more valuable, a second chance at happiness. And this time, I wouldn't let it slip away.